after the Acolyte's dark side promises, what's next for the evil side of Star Wars? Welcome to Star Wars Uplink. So, Acolyte had a quote-unquote Sith-led Star Wars story. I would question that heavily. I think what we got set up for a Sith-led series, but was not, in fact, a Sith-led Star Wars series. It opened the door for it, which I appreciate. I feel like Season 1 set up what needed to happen, or
the lore of what is going to happen?
Well, not even that. Maybe just it did what it had to do to prove to Lucasfilm. Like, I don't feel like Leslie Headland or the creative team could have told the story that they seem to be interested in without doing this season first.
To see if there's, like, people interested in such a story.
Well, I just feel like Lucasfilm and Disney Star Wars at this point is very scared of the dark side. Very tentative. Every time that we've had something that was touted as a very dark side story, it ends up going a different direction ultimately. If you look at like Battlefront 2's campaign, it was heavily marketed as a dark side story and was actually a redemption story to the rebellion. But like changing gears and going into this idea of like a Sith-led Star Wars, like what is the state of the dark side in Star Wars at this point? I feel like Star Wars at this point needs to go into this direction. I feel like we've gotten enough stories from the light side's perspective. I feel like we need a little bit of a refresh. My fear is they're going to misunderstand the dark side and misunderstand the Force in Star Wars.
Yeah.
If you want a more gray story, Star Wars is not the lore or universe or mythology that you should be playing around with.
Yeah.
There are some gray perspectives in Star Wars, but the gray comes from the perspective. It doesn't come from the actual ideology itself. The ideology of Star Wars is there is the light side and there is the dark side. It's black or it's white. And you are only one thing at any point in the story.
Yeah.
And you can perceive yourself as being in the light side, but also doing very heinous acts like we see in Andor. That idea stands strong. They don't try to play with like, oh yeah, you can kind of float in between the ideas of the Force. It's like, no, you can utilize the same like tools and war and monstrosities that the other side uses. But in that regard, you are just as bad as them. Therefore, you are in the dark. You cannot float in between the two.
Right. Like you can use the dark to promote or to aid the light, I guess.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that you are good.
Yeah, it does not mean that you are good.
Yeah.
You might have good intentions behind your actions, but your actions are inherently bad.
Damning you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I fight for a sunrise I will not see. The beautiful, beautiful monologue in Andor. And there's a lot of this in Acolyte. If you look at Soul, his whole perspective, his whole intentions, his interactions, and his motivations in this story are from a clearly good intended purpose.
Yeah.
But therefore, because he is actively going against what the Force is designed for, the Force as the Jedi see it, and the light side of the Force is this absence of self. Yes, exactly. Now, if you look at like the prequel series and the Jedi there, they take it to the extreme where like they perceive connection as a lack of love, but they don't actually make the connection that says, hey, love is actually a key part of the story, of the Force, of humanity. And if you take that away from the people, if you try to suppress that, it will showcase itself in ways that are ultimately negative. So they go to the extreme, and I feel like that's the ultimate downfall. And George Lucas is very much on like the Joseph Campbell side of the Force, where it needs to be good or evil.
Yeah.
And if you go towards the dark side, it will corrupt you. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Right.
And I feel like they're going to be going in some different directions and some interesting directions if they do it right with the Acolyte, with Plagueis, with Khmer, with Osha.
Yep.
because they're going around like this classic perception of the dark side being able to feel everything, and that being their strength. And the light side is very conservative with their views of feeling, because they've seen so many examples of feelings corrupting.
So in Star Wars, we've seen characters go from the light side to the dark side. Is there a chance you can go from the dark side to the light side, though?
You've got like the best example of this, which is Darth Vader.
That's true.
Darth Vader is redeemed by Anakin Skywalker. Obviously, in Star Wars, we don't have clear like repercussions or consequences of actions of going from the dark side to the light side.
Usually it's always just ends in death. And
all of the examples that we have, Darth Vader and Kylo Ren, they have this redemptive arc, and then they die. So we don't actually see the repercussions of those actions. We don't see any consequences, which I think would be a very interesting thing for, if they want to do a redemption story. I personally would like to see a story that is purely about corruption.
Yeah.
Showcase the advancement and the introduction of the life cycle of the Rule of Two.
Yeah.
With Osha, with Khmer, with Plagueis, like have the full ecosystem, really.
Yeah.
And I think that would be the very interesting direction to take that. Like, how can you have this introduction? Because Khmer, as far as we know, he's looking for an acolyte. He's not necessarily looking for an apprentice.
Right.
So I think they could go almost like a similar route of like the Inquisitorius, of where the Inquisitors aren't technically Sith because they're not taught the ways of the Sith.
Right.
That's the asterisk that they put on them.
Taught in a way that
they utilize the dark side without understanding it, I think, is the belief that is there. So I wonder which direction they're going to take there. But if you really look at the Sith, if you look at the core pieces of the dark side, Osha and Khmer have to have a tragedy of a story. Because that's what the dark side demands.
Right.
And I would love to see almost like all of the emotions, all of the negative perceptions of the emotions of lust, of want, of need, of love, like having all of these things tied into it, because that's the core of the dark side.
Right.
I think that would be fascinating.
That would be really good. Just the overwhelm of all of the emotions in a way, and just them getting carried away with all of it.
Yeah.
Be really good.
It would be a great contrast to the Jedi as well, especially the Jedi of that era.
Yes. It's really too bad that they took away so many of May's memories.
Yes.
Because that could have been a really interesting redemption arc. I feel like we're always going to see this like yin and yang with May and Osha, because apparently they're the same person, and
but also the balance.
Right,
like,
exactly.
The Force needs balance.
And they are like the two wolves in a way.
Yeah. In
one person, but yeah, it's so it kind of feels a little cheapened, I guess, for her to be like on the light side now.
There are many problems with the path that they took for Osha and May, especially in May's wiping of her memory.
Yeah.
I've seen this talked about a lot. You've brought it up. I think it would have been better for Osha to kill May. And then that would have been very interesting, very fascinating, with this idea that they are the same person. Not just twins, but literally the same makeup.
Right.
Of biology, of the Force, of the midichlorians. Like, they are literally the same. They're literally clones of the Force.
I kind of have a feeling that we're getting to that point where Osha will kill May. I think they're building up their relationship, and they
already had a whole season about that.
Symbiosis or whatever they are.
They're just going to do the same thing, but in inverse again, because now May doesn't know that Osha's alive, or she knows that she's alive, but doesn't understand the connection.
True.
Where in the first season, it's got basically the inverse of that, because Osha believes May is dead, and May believes that Osha is dead.
Yep.
And then they go through and they have this whole life cycle, and they get to this moment, and instead of having like a clear end to the story, a clear, like, satisfying perspective, something to say, really, that to be a member of the dark side, you have to make the ultimate sacrifice. That, I think, would have been... Yeah. I think that would have been much more interesting. But instead, we have a much more symbolic and a much less satisfying end.
Much more convoluted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there's no motivation for May's character to want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that we've seen of May up to this point has been very selfish. And then there gets to a point where she wants to do this for Osha.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole wiping of the memory isn't necessarily going to help Osha because he didn't wipe all of her. She's not a blank slate.
Right.
She remembers everything up to the point where she died, quote unquote, as far as the Jedi are concerned.
Yeah.
I think it would have been much more interesting if instead of May, like clearly knowing her that she's May,
right,
everyone think that she's Osha.
Ah.
That would have been much more interesting if they want the whole memory thing to stay there.
Right.
That I think would have been a better perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But
we got what we got.
Yeah, we got what we got.
Now we have to deal with it.
Now we have to theorize around that. But let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Check out our podcast, and may the Force be with you.